The morning sun peeked through the blinds as Leo stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. His dark brown skin glowed in the soft light, and his curly black hair needed just a bit more gel to stay in place. Today was his first day at Westridge Academy, and everything had to be perfect. "You almost ready, kid?" his father called from downstairs. Leo straightened his blue tie and took a deep breath. "Coming, Dad." Antonio Rossi wasn't just any father, he was Antonio Rossi, the man whose name made even tough guys nervous. People called him the Ghost because his business dealings happened in the shadows, but everyone felt their effects. Leo had grown up knowing his father was different, powerful in ways that stayed unspoken at the dinner table. Downstairs, his mother Nia was packing his lunch. Unlike his Italian father, Nia had grown up in a working-class black neighborhood across town. She'd met Antonio at her waitressing job 15 years ago, and despite coming from different worlds, they'd built a life together. "Remember," Nia said, handing Leo his lunch bag, "just be yourself. You're smart, you're kind, and you belong there just as much as anyone else." Leo nodded, but his stomach was doing flips. Westridge Academy was known for two things: excellent college placement and old money. As the son of a black mother and an Italian father who happened to run the city's largest criminal organization, Leo didn't exactly fit either category. Antonio placed his hand on Leo's shoulder. Despite his reputation, Antonio's touch was always gentle with his family. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and serious. "You're my son. You walk in there with your head high. Anyone gives you trouble, you remember who you are." "I know, Dad," Leo said. "But I just want to be normal there. No special treatment." Antonio smiled, the kind of smile that rarely appeared in his business meetings. "Then that's what you'll get. Just an education like everybody else." The drive to school was quiet. Leo watched the neighborhoods change from their middle-class suburb to the wealthy enclave where Westridge stood with its brick buildings and ivy-covered walls. Students in pressed uniforms walked through wrought iron gates, laughing and talking like they belonged there, because they did. As Antonio's black SUV pulled up to the curb, Leo felt eyes turning toward them. "I can walk from here," Leo said quickly. Antonio nodded, understanding. "Call if you need anything, anything at all." Leo stepped out, straightened his blazer, and walked toward the gates alone. He could feel the stares as he passed groups of students. He heard whispers. Was it because they somehow knew about his father? Or was it simply because his skin was darker than almost everyone else's? The main office was housed in a building that looked like it belonged in a movie about fancy colleges. The secretary raised her eyebrows slightly when Leo gave his name, but her smile stayed professional. "Ah, Mr. Rossi, we've been expecting you. Here's your schedule and a map of the campus. Your first class is Advanced Literature with Mr. Parker in Building C." Leo thanked her and headed out, studying his map as he walked. He almost didn't notice when he bumped into someone. "Watch it," a voice snapped. Leo looked up to see a tall boy with blonde hair looking him up and down like he was examining something strange. "Sorry," Leo said, stepping back. The boy continued staring. "You must be new." "I'm Tyler." "Leo," he replied, extending his hand. Tyler ignored it. "Let me guess. Scholarship program." The question hung in the air, loaded with assumptions. Leo felt his face grow warm. "No," he answered simply, "just new." Tyler's eyebrows lifted. "Interesting. Well, welcome to Westridge, I guess." As Tyler walked away, Leo heard him mutter something to his friends that made them laugh. He couldn't catch the words, but the tone was clear enough. Leo found his classroom and took a seat near the back. As students filed in, he noticed the quick glances, the second looks, the empty seats beside him that filled only when no others remained. He opened his notebook and focused on the blank page, thinking about his parents' words. His father had built an empire by making people fear his name. His mother had taught him to stand tall in a world that might try to make him feel small. And now Leo just wanted to make it through the day without anyone figuring out either part of who he really was. The teacher called the class to order, and Leo's first day at Westridge Academy officially began. Little did he know that in just a few weeks, his carefully constructed new life would come crashing down in ways that would shake the entire school to its foundation. 3 weeks had passed since Leo's first day at Westridge Academy. He'd settled into a routine, head down, work hard, keep to himself. Some days were easier than others. He'd made a few acquaintances, mostly other kids who didn't quite fit the Westridge mold. There was Zach from the science club, whose parents were new money tech entrepreneurs, and Diane, a quiet girl with thick glasses who sat next to him in math. But Tyler and his friends had noticed Leo, really noticed him. It started with small things. Whispers when he walked by in the hallway. Snickers during gym class. Leo tried to ignore them, remembering his mother's advice to rise above it. "Hey, chocolate milk," Tyler called out one day as Leo passed their lunch table. His friends laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. Leo kept walking, his jaw tight. In his old neighborhood, words like that would start fights. Here, he had to play by different rules. The next day, someone had scribbled "Go back to your hood" on his locker in erasable marker. Leo quickly wiped it off before anyone could see, his heart pounding. He looked around, but the hallway was full of students rushing to class, nobody paying attention. Everything okay? Leo turned to see Anna, a girl from his English class. She had long brown hair and kind eyes that noticed too much. "Yeah, fine," Leo said, forcing a smile. "Just some idiot being an idiot." Anna frowned. Was it Tyler? He and his friends are the worst. "Don't worry about it," Leo said, closing his locker. The last thing he needed was someone feeling sorry for him. Or worse, someone connecting the dots to his father. Antonio Rossi had a reputation for handling problems permanently, and Leo had promised his parents he'd handle school on his own. But Tyler wasn't done. During history class that afternoon, he kept tossing tiny paper balls at the back of Leo's head whenever the teacher turned to write on the board. "Mr. Rossi, is there a problem?" Mr. Hudson asked when Leo finally turned around to glare at Tyler. "No, sir," Leo said, feeling the eyes of the entire class on him. "Then please face forward and pay attention." Tyler smirked from across the room. After school, Leo headed to the locker room to change for track practice. He joined the team hoping physical activity would help burn off his frustration. The locker room was nearly empty when he arrived, just the way he liked it. He was tying his shoes when he heard the door open and multiple footsteps enter. Looking up, he saw Tyler flanked by his three closest friends, Rich, Cooper, and Drew. All tall, all from wealthy families, all wearing the same smug expression. "Well, well," Tyler said, leaning against the lockers. "If it isn't Westridge's diversity hire." Leo stood up slowly. "I'm not looking for trouble." "That's funny," Rich said, "because trouble found you anyway." "We've been wondering," Tyler continued, stepping closer, "how exactly did someone like you get into Westridge? Your daddy must be someone important." Leo's blood ran cold. If they only knew. "I earned my spot just like anyone else," Leo said evenly. "Did you get that, guys?" Tyler laughed. He'd earned his spot. With what? An affirmative action coupon. Cooper and Drew laughed on cue. Leo counted to 10 in his head, remembering his father's advice about controlling his temper. "I need to get to practice," Leo said, trying to step around them. Tyler shoved him back against the lockers. "We're not done talking." The metal rattled as Leo's back hit the lockers. "Take your hands off me," he warned, his voice low. "Or what?" Tyler challenged. "You'll call your homies from the ghetto to come save you." Leo felt something snap inside. Before he could stop himself, he'd shoved Tyler back, hard enough that the other boy stumbled over a bench. Tyler's face darkened with anger. Get him. What happened next was quick and ugly. 3 against 1 weren't fair odds, and Leo found himself pinned against the lockers. Tyler grabbed a pair of scissors from his bag. "I've always wondered what this feels like," he said, reaching for Leo's curly hair. "Let's call it a science experiment." Leo struggled, but Cooper and Drew held him firmly. Tyler cut a small patch of hair near Leo's temple. "Look at that texture," Tyler mocked, showing his friends. "Definitely not like real people's hair." The locker room door banged open. Coach Wilson stood there, his expression changing from confusion to anger as he took in the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. The boys immediately released Leo. Tyler hid the scissors behind his back. "Just messing around," Coach Tyler said. Coach Wilson looked at Leo, whose face was flushed with humiliation and rage. "Rossi, you okay?" Leo nodded stiffly, though he was far from okay. "All of you, principal's office." now. As they filed out, Tyler brushed past Leo and whispered, "This isn't over, Rossi. Not by a long shot." That night, Leo stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, looking at the missing patch of hair. He thought about telling his parents what had happened, but then imagined what his father might do. No, this was his battle to fight. He just wasn't sure how to win it. The principal's office had done nothing. Tyler and his friends got detention for roughhousing, and Leo was told to be more careful about provoking confrontations. When Leo tried to explain about the racial comments, Principal Whitman had sighed and said, "Let's not make everything about race, Mr. Rossi." 2 weeks had passed since the locker room incident, and things had only gotten worse. Leo's textbooks disappeared from his desk when he went to sharpen his pencil. His gym clothes ended up in the toilet. The words "Go home" appeared on his locker again, this time in permanent marker that took nearly an hour to scrub off. Leo hadn't told his parents. Each morning his father would ask, "Everything good at school?" And Leo would nod and say, "All good, Dad." His mother would study his face a bit longer, sensing something wasn't right, but Leo had gotten good at hiding his feelings. But there was one bright spot in all this darkness. Anna, the girl from his English class, had started sitting with him at lunch. She was smart and funny, and she didn't seem to care what Tyler or anyone else thought. "You should really try out for the debate team," Anna said one day as they ate lunch in a quiet corner of the cafeteria. "Mr. Barnett said your essay on civil disobedience was the best in class." Leo smiled, feeling normal for the first time in weeks. "Maybe I will." From across the cafeteria, he could feel Tyler watching them. The look on his face was pure hatred. Later that day, Leo noticed Tyler talking to Anna in the hallway. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see Anna shaking her head, her face getting red. When Leo approached, Tyler walked away with a smirk. "What was that about?" Leo asked. Anna hesitated. "Nothing. Just Tyler being Tyler." "Anna, please." "What did he say?" She looked down at her books. "He told me I shouldn't hang out with you. That you're not. That your family isn't." She couldn't finish. "My family isn't what?" Leo pressed, his heart pounding. "He said your dad is some kind of criminal, that everyone knows it." She looked up at him. "I told him to get lost. I don't care what your dad does." Leo felt the floor drop out from under him. They knew. Or at least, they thought they knew. He mumbled something to Anna about being late for class and walked away, his mind racing. That afternoon, instead of going to track practice, Leo hid in the library, searching online for any mention of his father. There wasn't much. Antonio Rossi was careful that way. But there were a few old news articles mentioning him as a person of interest in investigations that never led anywhere. How had Tyler found out? Leo's stomach churned as he closed the browser window. This was exactly what his parents had been afraid of. When the final bell rang, Leo headed for the back exit, hoping to avoid Tyler and his crew. The parking lot was nearly empty as most students had already left. His bus would be arriving soon at the front entrance, so he'd have to hurry around the building. He was halfway across the parking lot when a car pulled up beside him, Tyler's shiny red sports car, a 16th birthday gift from his judge father. The windows rolled down to reveal Tyler in the driver's seat with Rich, Cooper, and 2 other guys Leo didn't recognize. "Hey Rossi, need a ride?" Tyler called out, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. "I'm good," Leo replied, picking up his pace. The car kept pace with him. "Come on, don't be like that. We just want to talk." "Nothing to talk about," Leo said, reaching the edge of the lot. Just a little further and he'd be around the front of the building, where there were still teachers and students. The car suddenly accelerated and cut in front of him. All 5 boys piled out, forming a semicircle around Leo. "You've been getting pretty cozy with Anna," Tyler said, his smile gone now. "I don't like that." "That's up to her, not you," Leo said, looking for a way past them. Tyler stepped closer. "You think you're so smart. Think you're better than us because a few teachers like you. But we know what you really are." "And what's that?" Leo asked, anger rising in his chest. "A charity case," Tyler spat. "Or maybe just the son of a gangster who bought his way in." Leo's hands balled into fists. "Get out of my way." "Or what? You'll call Daddy to put a hit on us." Tyler laughed, and the others joined in. Leo tried to push past them, but Rich shoved him back. Leo stumbled and nearly fell. "Go back where you came from," Cooper said, giving him another push. Leo swung then, his fist connecting with Cooper's jaw. There was a moment of shocked silence, and then they were on him. 5 against 1. Fists rained down as Leo tried to cover his head. He fought back as best he could, landing a few solid punches, but he was outnumbered. He heard Tyler's voice through the pain. "Get it on video. Get it all." Someone was filming. Through swollen eyes, Leo saw a phone pointed at him as the beating continued. When it was finally over, Leo lay on the asphalt, tasting blood. Tyler knelt beside him, grabbing a handful of Leo's hair to lift his head. "This is what happens to people who don't know their place," he hissed, then let Leo's head drop back to the ground. They left him there, bleeding and broken in the empty parking lot. As their laughter faded, Leo tried to stand but couldn't. The world spun around him, and darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. The last thing he remembered was the janitor's shocked face appearing above him and a distant voice saying, "Someone call an ambulance." The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the room as Leo drifted in and out of consciousness. His right eye was swollen shut, 2 ribs were cracked, and the doctors were concerned about a possible concussion. But it was the quiet figure sitting beside his bed that would have terrified most people who knew him. Antonio Rossi hadn't spoken a word since arriving at the hospital. He simply sat there, holding his son's hand, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Nia paced the room, alternating between tears and anger. "I should have known," she said, wiping her eyes. "He's been so quiet these past few weeks. I knew something was wrong." Antonio's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at Leo. "They found the video," he said, his voice eerily calm. Nia stopped pacing. "What video?" "Those boys filmed it, posted it online for laughs." Antonio's hand tightened slightly around Leo's. "They've been bullying him for weeks. Racial slurs, harassment, and now this." The door opened and a police officer stepped in. "Mr. and Mrs. Rossi, I'm Officer Chen. I'd like to ask a few questions about what happened to your son." Antonio stood slowly, straightening to his full height. Though not a tall man, his presence filled the room. "My son was attacked by 5 boys who targeted him because of his race. It's all on video. What other questions could you possibly have?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We're still gathering evidence, sir. These are serious allegations." "Allegations?" Nia's voice rose. "My son is lying in a hospital bed. What more evidence do you need?" "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but do you know who those boys are?" Antonio cut in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The ringleader is Tyler Hartman. His father is Judge Robert Hartman. I imagine that complicates things for your department, doesn't it, officer?" Officer Chen's expression confirmed Antonio's suspicion. "We'll conduct a thorough investigation, Mr. Rossi, I assure you." Antonio smiled without humor. "Of course you will." He turned back to Leo's bed, effectively dismissing the officer. After Chen left, Nia collapsed into a chair. "They're not going to do anything, are they? Because of who Tyler's father is." Antonio knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Don't worry about that. I'll handle it." "Antonio, no," Nia whispered, suddenly alarmed. "Not your way. Please." "There are many ways to handle things, my love." He kissed her forehead gently, some cleaner than others. That evening, while Nia stayed with Leo, Antonio returned home. In his study, he poured a glass of whiskey and made a call. "Vince, I need everything you can find on Judge Robert Hartman. And I mean everything. Tax records, bank statements, phone records, dirty little secrets. I want to know him better than his own wife does." He hung up and made another call. "Paulie, remember that reporter who owes us a favor? The one from the Chronicle. It's time to collect." By midnight, Antonio had made 17 calls. Each one set a different piece of the puzzle in motion. He was a chess player by nature, always thinking 5 moves ahead. And now, every piece on his board was aimed at the people who had hurt his son. The next morning, he was back at the hospital when Leo finally opened his eyes fully. "Dad?" Leo's voice was hoarse. Antonio leaned forward. "I'm here, son." Leo's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I tried to handle it myself. You have nothing to be sorry for." Antonio stroked his son's hair gently, careful to avoid the bruises. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." And so Leo did. He told his father about the whispers that first day, the escalating harassment, the words scribbled on his locker, the incident in the locker room, and finally, the beating in the parking lot. He told him about the school's indifference, about Principal Whitman dismissing his concerns about racism. Throughout the story, Antonio's expression never changed. But inside, a cold fury was building, the kind that had made him both feared and respected in his world. When Leah finished, Antonio simply nodded. "Rest now. Everything will be taken care of." "Dad, what are you going to do?" Leah asked, worry creeping into his voice. Antonio smiled reassuringly. "Nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about. But there are consequences for every action, Leo. Those boys and their families need to learn that." As Antonio left the hospital room, he checked his phone. The first reports were already coming in. Judge Hartman's name had appeared in connection with a federal investigation into judicial misconduct. It was just the first drop in what would soon become a flood. In the underground world of power and influence, Antonio Rossi was known for his patience and precision. He never acted in anger or haste. That's what made him so effective and so dangerous. And now, that calculated precision was focused entirely on the people who had dared to harm his son. 3 days after Leo's attack, Judge Robert Hartman was having breakfast with his wife when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was his clerk. "Robert Hartman," he answered, voice crisp and confident. His face changed as he listened, first confused, then concerned, and finally pale with shock. "What do you mean, federal agents? In my chambers?" His wife looked up from her coffee, alarmed. "I'll be right there," he said, hanging up. "Don't worry," he told his wife, trying to sound calm. "Just some misunderstanding." But it wasn't a misunderstanding. By noon, every news channel in the city was running the story. Judge Robert Hartman under federal investigation for allegedly accepting bribes to dismiss cases against certain businesses. Tyler was at school when his phone started blowing up with messages. He slipped into the bathroom to check them and found dozens of links to news stories about his father. His blood ran cold as he read the headlines. This couldn't be happening. His dad was untouchable in this town. Across town, a similar scene was playing out for Rich Peterson. His father, who owned the largest car dealership chain in the state, received notice that all his business permits were being audited and temporarily suspended pending investigation. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Peterson shouted into the phone. "I've been operating for 20 years without a single violation." Rich watched his father's face grow redder as the conversation continued. When he hung up, he looked at his son with a mixture of anger and fear. "Someone's got it out for us," he said. "This isn't random." At Cooper Williams' house, his mother was in tears. Anonymous emails containing photos of her husband with his much younger secretary had somehow been sent to everyone in their social circle. The family was being torn apart in real time. Drew Thompson's family restaurant, a local institution for 3 generations, was suddenly hit with surprise health inspections that found critical violations requiring immediate closure. And the video of Leo's beating, which Tyler had shared with just a few friends, somehow found its way to the school board, the local news stations, and every parent with a child at Westridge Academy. Only this version was different. It included clear audio of the racial slurs and showed the unprovoked nature of the attack. Principal Whitman was bombarded with angry calls from parents, community leaders, and the press. The school board called an emergency meeting. "How is this allowed to happen?" demanded one board member. "These boys have been terrorizing this student for weeks, and nothing was done." Whitman stammered about conflicting accounts and boys being boys, but nobody was buying it. By the end of the week, Whitman was placed on administrative leave, and the 5 boys involved in the attack were suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. In his hospital room, Leo watched it all unfold on the small TV mounted on the wall. He wasn't stupid. He knew his father was behind this. The timing was too perfect. Antonio visited every day, bringing Leo's favorite foods and helping him catch up on schoolwork. He never mentioned the chaos engulfing the families of Leo's attackers, but there was a satisfied glint in his eye whenever Leo brought it up. "Dad," Leo said during one visit, his voice low even though they were alone, What did you do? Antonio looked at his son calmly. I didn't do anything illegal, if that's what you're asking. But all this stuff happening to Tyler's dad, to all their families, it's because of you, isn't it? Antonio was quiet for a moment. Let me tell you something about power, Leo. True power isn't about violence. It's about knowing people's weaknesses and being patient. He squeezed Leo's hand gently. Judge Hartman has been taking bribes for years. I simply made sure the right people were looking in the right places. And the others? Actions have consequences, Antonio said simply. Those boys and their families thought they were untouchable because of their money and their positions. They thought they could hurt you without repercussions. His eyes hardened. They were wrong. Leo wasn't sure how to feel. Part of him was horrified at how quickly his father had brought these families to their knees. But another part, the part that still ached from their fists and their words, felt a deep sense of justice. What happens now? Leo asked. Antonio smiled. Now we wait. The truth has a way of spreading, and lies have a way of crumbling. By the time you're ready to go back to school, things will be very different. Leo nodded slowly, understanding that his life would never be the same. The careful boundaries he tried to maintain between his family's world and his school life had completely collapsed. And somehow, in the rubble of those boundaries, he was starting to see a new path forward, one where he didn't have to hide who he was or where he came from. 2 weeks after the attack, Leo was finally well enough to return home. The bruises on his face had faded from purple to yellow, and his ribs still ached when he laughed, but the doctors said he was healing well. As his father helped him into the house, Leo noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Security, Antonio explained, following his son's gaze. Just a precaution. Inside, their home felt different somehow. Flowers filled the living room, get-well wishes from Antonio's associates. Naya had taken time off work to care for Leo, and the smell of her famous chicken soup filled the kitchen. Leo sank carefully onto the couch, wincing slightly. The news was on, muted but showing footage of Judge Hartman leaving the courthouse surrounded by reporters. They're saying he could face up to 15 years, Naya said, sitting beside Leo. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Leo watched his father's face. Antonio showed no reaction, just calmly sipped his coffee. And the others? Leo asked. Rich's father lost his dealerships, Naya replied. The building permits were revoked permanently when they found code violations going back years. Cooper's parents are divorcing, very publicly and very messily. And Drew's family restaurant is finished after those health violations. What about Tyler? Leo asked. The ringleader, the one whose words had cut deepest. Antonio set down his coffee. Tyler Hartman has bigger problems than just his father's legal troubles. The district attorney is pressing charges against all 5 boys. With the video evidence, they're being charged as adults. Charges? Leo sat up straighter despite the pain. Like criminal charges. Assault and battery with a hate crime enhancement, Antonio said. The DA is making an example of them. Leo fell silent, processing this. Part of him felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, consequences for what they'd done. But another part felt uneasy about how quickly their lives had been destroyed. Later that evening, when Nia was out picking up Leo's prescription, he confronted his father in the study. I know what you did, Leo said, standing in the doorway. All of this, it's too perfect. Too coordinated. Antonio looked up from his desk. You think I orchestrated all this? Didn't you? Antonio gestured for Leo to sit. Let me tell you something about power and justice, son. The world isn't fair. You know that better than most. Those boys hurt you because they thought they could get away with it. Because their fathers have money and influence. They thought they were untouchable. He leaned forward. But nobody is untouchable. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has weaknesses. So you found their secrets. I didn't plant evidence, if that's what you're asking. Judge Hartman was already corrupt. I simply made sure people were looking in the right places. Leo thought about this. What about the school? Principal Whitman. A thin smile crossed Antonio's face. The school board received over 300 complaints from parents after that video leaked. The principal's handling of the situation was inadequate. And the video? I know Tyler only shared it with a few friends. The internet is a mysterious place, Antonio said vaguely. Things have a way of getting around. Leo shook his head, conflicted. I don't know how to feel about all this. They were wrong. What they did was wrong, but their whole families are suffering. Actions have consequences, Antonio said firmly. Not just for you and me, but for everyone. Those boys chose to attack you because of your race. Their parents raised them to believe they could do whatever they wanted without repercussions. He paused. I didn't create their downfall. I simply removed the protection that kept them from facing justice. Leah was quiet for a long moment. The other kids at school are going to know. About you. About us. Yes, Antonio acknowledged. That was unavoidable. I wanted to be normal, Leo said softly. I didn't want to be the black kid or the mafia kid. I just wanted to be Leo. Antonio moved to kneel before his son, taking Leo's hands in his. Listen to me. You are normal. Your mother and I, our lives, our backgrounds, they're part of you, but they don't define you. You define yourself by your choices, by your actions. Leo looked into his father's eyes, seeing not the feared mafia boss others saw, but simply his dad, the man who read him bedtime stories and taught him to ride a bike. You're not ashamed of me, are you? Antonio asked quietly. The question surprised Leo. He'd never thought his father would worry about such things. No, Leo answered honestly. I'm not ashamed. I just wanted to make my own way. And you will, Antonio promised. But sometimes you need to stand up and claim your place in the world. Sometimes you need to show people that disrespect has a price. As Leo went to bed that night, he thought about identity, justice, and power. His father was right. He couldn't hide who he was anymore. When he returned to school, everyone would know he was Antonio Rossi's son. The question was, what would he do with that knowledge? 3 weeks later, Leo stood at the entrance of Westridge Academy, taking a deep breath before pushing open the heavy wooden doors. The hallway fell silent as he walked in, eyes following his every move. He kept his head high, just like his father had taught him. Westridge Academy had changed during his absence. Dr. Winters, the new acting principal, had immediately implemented a zero-tolerance policy for bullying and racial harassment. The school board had approved mandatory diversity training for all staff and students. And the 5 boys who had attacked Leo were gone, expelled and facing criminal charges. As Leo walked to his locker, he noticed the whispers and stares, but they were different now. Not hostile, but curious, maybe even a little afraid. Everyone knew who his father was. Everyone had seen the video of his beating. Everyone had watched as the families of his attackers crumbled under mysterious pressures. Leo, a voice called out. He turned to see Anna hurrying toward him, her face bright with a smile. She stopped short, as if unsure whether to hug him. I'm so glad you're back, she said instead. Thanks, Leo replied, surprised by how normal her friendliness felt among all the strangeness. We saved you a seat in chemistry, she said, falling into step beside him. And in the cafeteria too, if you want it. We? Anna nodded toward a group of students waiting by the classroom door, Zach from Science Club, Diane with her thick glasses, and a few others Leah recognized as the kids who didn't quite fit the Westridge mold. Your fan club, Anna said with a small smile. Turns out, standing up to Tyler and his crew made you pretty popular with everyone who was too scared to do it themselves. Leo hadn't thought of it that way. He'd been so focused on his own struggle that he hadn't considered how many other students might have suffered under Tyler's reign of terror. The morning passed in a blur of welcome backs and catch-up assignments. Teachers who had barely noticed him before now checked in regularly to see how he was doing. In English class, Mr. Barnett asked him to stay behind after the bell. I wanted to apologize, Mr. Barnett said once they were alone. I saw signs of what was happening, but I didn't do enough. Leo nodded, not sure what to say. Your essay on civil disobedience, Mr. Barnett continued, it was truly exceptional. I've recommended you for the advanced placement program next year. Thank you, Leo said, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort at the special attention. At lunch, Leo sat with Anna and her friends. The cafeteria was quieter than he remembered, students speaking in hushed tones as they glanced his way. They're scared of you now, Zach said bluntly, pushing his glasses up his nose. Or scared of your dad at least. I don't want people to be scared of me, Leo said. Then give them something else to think about, Anna suggested. Dr. Winters is looking for students to join the new diversity committee. You could sign up. Leo considered this, using his newfound visibility for something positive. It wasn't a bad idea. After school, Leo found himself in Dr. Winters' office, volunteering not just for the diversity committee, but also for the student council. The new principal was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I'll be honest with you, Leo, she said. What happened here was a failure on multiple levels. We let you down, and I'm determined not to let that happen to another student. I want to help, Leo said simply. Dr. Winters studied him for a moment. Some of the parents are nervous about your involvement, given your family's reputation. My father runs businesses, Leo said carefully. Some people don't like how he does it. But he taught me to stand up for what's right, and that's what I want to do here. Dr. Winters smiled. Well said. I'll put you on both committees. As Leo left the office, his phone buzzed with a text from his father. How was your first day back? Leo typed back, different, but good, I think. Walking home, Leo took the long route through the park. The past few months had been a whirlwind of pain, revelation, and change. He'd gone from trying to hide who he was to having it exposed in the most public way possible. But somehow, in the aftermath, he'd found a kind of freedom. He no longer needed to pretend. Yes, he was black in a mostly white school. Yes, his father was Antonio Rossi, a man whose name made people nervous. But he was also Leo's student, friend, maybe even future leader. At home, Leo found his parents waiting in the kitchen. His mother had baked his favorite cookies, and his father had cleared his schedule to hear about Leo's first day back. I joined the student council, Leo announced as he dropped his backpack by the door, and the diversity committee. Nia beamed with pride. That's wonderful, honey. Antonio nodded approvingly. Taking a leadership role. Smart move. I've been thinking, Leo said, taking a cookie. About what you said, Dad. About power and how to use it. Antonio raised an eyebrow, waiting. You've built your power one way, Leo continued. But I think I want to build mine differently. Not through fear, but through respect. A complex emotion crossed Antonio's face, pride mixed with something like wistfulness. That's a harder path, son, but maybe a better one. I want to study law, Leo said, the idea forming as he spoke it. Real law, not the kind that can be bought. I want to help people who don't have power. Antonio was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. If that's what you want, I'll support you. 100%. That night, as Leo lay in bed, he thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. The bullying had been terrible, yes, but it had forced him to confront truths about himself and his family that he'd been avoiding. He couldn't change who his father was. He couldn't change the color of his skin or how people might judge him for either. But he could decide who he wanted to become. As he drifted off to sleep, Leo felt something he hadn't expected to feel again so soon: hope. Not just for himself, but for the future he was beginning to imagine. A future where he could take the lessons from his father's world and use them to build something better. Something that was uniquely his own.